I used to be afraid of you, but I don't think I am anymore.
There's nothing to fear except God.
For me, God is a disease.
It's the things that make you look at what you thought you saw in a different light. The hole in the Pentagon being too small for a plane. The lawn isn't mussed up. The government's not showing the plane hitting when many cameras photographed it.
There's nothing to fear except God. God. God.
Oh, if you already know the answers to your questions, then why ask?
It's too big.
Back and to the left, 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 back and to the left.
Hello, everyone. This is Half a God's Face podcast. I'm here with Austin Healy-Bozer, who I'm not going to say anything about him this time, but he's back for us to talk about the new Adam Curtis series, Shifty. Anyone that knows me knows that I am a diehard Adam Curtis fan. I have been since Hypernormalization released back in something like 2017. I remember being obsessed with that movie. And yeah, we're probably going to do a bigger Adam Curtis episode, but it's always exciting when he drops a film. And I forced Austin to watch the 5 episodes on Shifty just in time for us to record an episode on it, because he is one of the greatest filmmakers in the world. He's one of my favorites. And yeah, so how's it going, Austin? How did you enjoy Shifty?
Oh, I found it absolutely smashing, Zach. Yeah, a lot of obviously accents for 5 hours.
There's times where you can't even like understand them. Like the accents are kind of fucked.
Oh,
but
there's definitely parts of that country that you're not going to get any sort of understanding what they say.
yeah. So the way I would describe Shifty for anyone who's interested in watching it, so basically Adam Curtis has made his entire career of making films about politics and power, and he's known for his iconic voiceover, and there's no voiceover in this film, similar to Trauma Zone. And really, I feel like his stylistic evolution the last 2 projects has he's still fundamentally doing the same kind of things. Like, he's using a lot of amazing music, and he'll show like really cool, like he'll show like music videos, or he'll show artists like communes and stuff. But really, there's such a parallel between Trauma Zone, which was his last series, which is about the collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 80s, early 90s. And that film is, there's no voiceover, but it's just totally compelling, totally haunting. And Shifty is kind of the same vibe. I mean, it's interesting because it's the same time period as Trauma Zone, but you're also kind of seeing the collapse of different aspects of British society, namely the industrial manufacturing base. Like, there's a whole ton of stuff in Shifty where, you're seeing like a British like factory making things, and it just really makes you think. You're like, damn, I forgot that a country like Britain would like make things and export goods and stuff, but
No, it's interesting because it seems very relative to where we live, because I mean, I remember being really into my American history class, and we would always like stop around the 80s, because we'd be like, this is where our teachers would be like, this is kind of where it gets very like polarizing and very divisive, so I don't want to really get into that. And that's basically right where this starts.
Yep. No, I mean, I feel like there is a huge thing with, at least in the American education system, where you kind of have an incredibly vague overview of like the Reagan years. Like, I think I had a similar experience, like in school, that in America, they don't really tell you about, like, they'll tell you about like Jimmy Carter, LBJ, Nixon, like they'll kind of go into stuff. It still is not the best. I mean, they could still explain a lot more stuff more vividly, but yeah, they don't talk about Reagan at all in schools. I mean, I don't remember anyone talking about how the Clinton administration went. You know, you just kind of hear little bits and pieces. But no,
Finding out he got fellatio when you're like 9 years old.
but no, I love Curtis because all of his films are basically archival documentaries, and he'll use music and really exciting kind of cuts, and he'll cut around to like
Oh
all
my
kinds of stuff. And
gosh.
his movies are always hilarious. Like there's a part in Shifty where it's like it just cuts to like an elephant like in a classroom.
Yes.
And it's just like here is this elephant who is cheering up people in the psychiatric hospital. And you're like, am I about to see an elephant kill like 30 people in a room? Like this is fucking insane. But the way I would pitch Adam Curtis to people is that the main characters of his like archival films are always like world leaders. It's
Mm,
always world leaders, and then the biggest like it'll be major figures that were, you know, influential in some way, either like artists or something. And in Shifty, Margaret Thatcher is one of
yeah.
the main figures. And this has kind of been a thesis across at he, you know, The Living Dead, he really tackled Margaret Thatcher in a very direct way. It back in the 90s. That series has one of the most shocking endings I've ever seen where spoiler alert, Margaret Thatcher like there's a clip of Margaret Thatcher giving a speech and she like collapses and like hits her head on like the
What?
microphone.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he has a crazy clip like that. So she's in this series, and he does this thing where in Shifty, you'll watch it, and every scene, every cut, you'll go, wow, that's just like today. Like every single cut will be
Yeah.
like, wow, that's just like today. So there's a part early in the series too where Margaret Thatcher's giving a speech basically saying that immigration is a new
Mm,
huge issue, and she goes up in the polls, but then you get this really beautiful like footage of people on the street, like black people in England on the street being like, yeah, that was racist, and like you get like the pushback. And I never really realized until I saw Shifty like how many like race riots and stuff were happening in Britain
yeah.
in that period. I mean, I had no idea, but it really does show like this racial tension that as an American I had never even heard about it. And no, I mean, like I was saying, like I kind of cut myself off, but The Living Dead and there's another couple of films he has this thesis, but Curtis has said for years that he thinks that Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were super beloved, and people think of them as like great leaders, and like they were, you know, they did all these great things for their countries, at least, you know, obviously like a conservative would think that.
Yeah.
But in general, historians have been really nice to both of them. And Curtis, he has said this time and again where he's like, I think they were a lot more of failures. They failed in a lot more ways than historians have really acknowledged. And
Mm,
no, I mean the series you have like assistants to Thatcher, like her economics guy being like, yeah, we kind of realized that this wasn't going to work, but we did it anyway. And honestly, I think people were like doing this in a rigged manner. Like the guy is like, I think
yeah.
people are like stealing from the government, like the way they did this.
Well, I'm interested. The other film that you were talking about with Thatcher. I'm not really as I haven't seen as many Curtis films as you have, but there's a lot of just quiet moments with Thatcher where she's just walking
Yeah.
in or out of a room and kind of talking. And I thought that was very interesting. Just
No,
kind of
that
like the mundanity of it, I would say.
yeah, exactly. Because that's also like a great motif across Adam Curtis's work is
Okay.
he'll feature clips of world leaders when like they like don't even know they're on camera. Like he always gets Tony Blair in shots, and Tony Blair always just looks so clueless.
Wait, how does he have access to all this footage again? Because it's
He
it's just
works for the BBC.
okay. That makes sense.
It's literally the BBC archive, and this film was partially produced by A24. which is like so random.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's like a huge production company, I guess, helped him. But I think it's all really inexpensive just because it's like he just has the ability to go through the archives and stuff. And no, I mean, basically, and he's brought this up in All Watched Over by Machines of Love and Grace, and he's brought this up in, I'm sure, hypernormalization and stuff. But in Curtis's mind, there was a decision made by a lot of politicians, both in Britain and then in America, where they kind of just gave up their power. And now it's kind of just a pantomime, is like how we describe it. Like leaders pretend like they have control over society, but they really don't. And one of the most like specific examples in Shifty is like when they're like, I think the UK government gives up its power to set interest rates to the Bank of England.
Mm-hmm.
There's that part, and he's just kind of like, and again, that he brings that up in all of his films, that politics in the era that we're in is so much less that a leader is like a mover of history and they come in and they kind of make history bend to their will, and it's much more like a managerial thing. Like political leaders are they're much less powerful, and they've kind of intentionally given up their power to technology and the banks and all this stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite. I was like briefly watching an interview he did on the miniseries, and he said kind of like, no, the society more shifts how they act.
Right. No, because the thing that's so interesting is, so he's cutting between, he kind of sets the stage and he has like some like racial tensions and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
working beneath the surface of England. And then he has these crazy parts in the movie where like a town has like chemicals seep into the water, and all the animals like stop breeding, and then all the people are like
rabbits.
yeah, what were the symptoms that the people of the village like had? Like they were like depressed and like felt
Yeah.
like what happened to them again? Do you remember?
Not particularly, but it's just
It's like an eerie thing, and then they bring in, there's a scene, I forget which episode, it might have been like episode 3 or something. They bring in like a psychiatrist or something, and they're like, yeah, so what's going on with all these people? Is it because there was a contamination like that's
right.
affecting the whole area? And they're like, no, they just have anxiety.
Yeah, it's like a conspiracy for sure.
They just like gaslight them. And no, in the first episode, the he brings up that the dog that has its like genitals like change into like ovaries or something.
Bruno, yeah, I texted you about that. I'm like, there's a trans dog in this question mark.
No, it's so wild because he has stuff like that that's very like subtle, it just sets the mood of like there's something in the air, there's
Mm-hmm.
things that are just unexplained. And that kind of is like an Alex Jones type of thing, like the keeping the water supplies making the frogs
frogs
gay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like a long time thing that Alex Jones has said. Like RFK Jr. brings up chemicals in like our food and like the water and stuff. And Curtis, he's not a conspiracy theorist. He really is not that radical on certain things, but he's just so well read that he can just kind of leave you in a place that all you have is to be like, yeah, there's some corruption going on here. Like how are like towns getting infected by this stuff, and you don't even hear about it? It's like some minor like story like in the series. But yeah, I'm trying to think. And then there was a whole part, I'm trying to like parse out like the biggest moments of the series. Stephen Hawking shows up as a character at a certain point.
Yeah, and he can still, at least in the first episode, he can still vaguely move his mouth.
Right.
And I was thinking, like, there's all this footage of these like very popular people, like, and they're all dead now.
Yeah.
It's like I don't think they brought up the fact that like Princess Diana just got in a car accident and died. I don't think there's any.
That is one thing I don't think they brought up. But yeah, there's some
even
crazy
David
footage of
Bowie
her,
at
too.
the end. David Bowie's not alive anymore.
Oh my god, bro! Yeah, didn't Bowie have like an insane quote in Shifty? where
Yeah,
he
he's
was.
at, like he's within like the last 5 minutes of it. It's crazy.
Yeah, doesn't he say something about the internet?
Yeah, yeah.
He said David Bowie comes into the movie and like just says this totally lucid thing about the internet, about it being like kind of a trap, right? It's like it's like people are going to think that they're experiencing freedom, but then the corporations are going to take control.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. There's a lot of dancing too.
Oh yeah, he loves dancing. He loves
Oh, okay.
music. There's he loves. I mean, there's that part where there's a guy giving he's showing that you can make sounds off of a computer, and then he features like a music video that was all made with like a computer and like no instruments like in the real world.
Yeah.
And he talks about like the remix and stuff because he's fascinated by remixing,
Mm.
and obviously his whole career is looking at footage that already exists
Right. I
and
mean, I was thinking of the DJ. I forget the DJ in the film, but he's like, I'm basically like making stuff with like other people's work, and I thought, well, that's very like on the nose.
yeah,
And
yeah.
because that's basically what he's doing. He is really just a DJ, but it's. I mean, I was thinking of kind of like a very different style of filmmaking, but like Hodorowski.
Mhm.
How when I watch one of his films, there's just all these like rapid ideas just firing and then going and fire it and just like boo boo boo. And I felt completely the same way about this. Like there were so many, especially with the editing, we were talking about the quick cuts.
Mhm.
It was just oh my god. Well, or right before somebody is in the frame, they'll like start to make a face like Churchill, and it'll just go away. And it's just something completely different, like horses pissing and shitting on the. I don't know if you saw that when some guys like cleaning up all the horses' shit for like the guard, and then
Oh
like
my God.
really quickly, the last shot, one of the horses in the distance is just pissing on the ground, and it cuts.
Oh my God, I don't remember that. Oh, oh yeah. Then they had all the fashion stuff in episode 5. He has a ton of like fashion shows and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
and
That are
it's no coincidence that as the film, well, I mean, just as in general, when uh, film and footage gets closer and closer to the present, it gets more and more easy to see. It's not black and white; it's not as grainy,
Mhm.
and it's doing that kind of subtly, I would say, as it goes through the 1 to 5 of the episodes.
Yeah, because there's definitely kind of a lethargy. I think the Trauma Zone is definitely a more exciting series as far as like like the this stylistic shift he's had of taking away the voiceover, because the Soviet Union collapsing was such a spectacular mess, and everything about it has like this horrific momentum, and it all precedes
Mm.
Putin, and then Putin takes over once the series is like done. But doing that same format for Britain, it's a lot more kind of like a general lethargy, because it's not like British society like collapsed necessarily, and when you compare those two series, like you really do get the feeling of, okay, there really is this stagnation though. Like there really is like this spiritual like stagnation within Britain and within with the Soviet Union, it was like just going downward. It was just a total collapse. Uh, but with with the Brits, it's a lot more like, okay, well, the empire is totally dead, and we're just, we're just gonna go to experimental therapies uh and I guess that's what's surprising is, when people think about history, you think, oh, like certain eras are like this, certain eras are like that. But Curtis is so good about being like, no, I mean, there's always, very like leftist, like hippie type stuff happening like all the time. And when you see
Yeah.
all these people doing therapy together, you're kind of like, wow, I didn't know people were doing that in the 80s. You would have you would have thought it would be like a 60s 70s thing, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
sure enough, even in the 80s there are kind of artistic revivals and stuff.
Yeah, it, I wonder if it's related to the ending when he kind of like poses the question, like, is this just kind of like a loop? You know,
Yeah, yeah,
like, does
cuz
this just go like in a circle?
No, it's fascinating to me because and I've heard people kind of cynically make that argument against Curtis, where it's like he kind of identifies that there's a problem, but then he doesn't quite have like a solution to the problem, which is fine because these films really work as like kind of like historical essay films,
Yeah.
But he's so good at just kind of like putting a mirror up to society, and man, I'm always just so energized when he releases a new series, but there's a lot to even like there's a lot to talk about because isn't there a part two, like another conflict I don't really know anything about is the Falklands War between England and
Oh
Argentina.
God.
I
Yeah.
think there's a part in the series where like someone's like testifying like about it, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember what they were saying?
I don't. I only recall kind of Thatcher being talking about it.
Yeah, because it's almost like a diversionary thing, like, and it's eerie, bro. I mean, the Falklands thing. I mean, I don't think it resembles the same kind of situation as current events as far as like Trump like
Sure.
bombing Iran, but I gotta say, some of the stuff with Trump bombing Iran is eerily similar to the Gaddafi stuff from hypernormalization,
Mm.
where in hypernormalization, Curtis has Gaddafi as one of the characters, and he kind of is like
I don't know why that's funny.
Gaddafi was, he's always kind of been a controversial like figure, mostly because he hates Israel and he hated Israel and Israel hated him.
Hmm.
And on top of that, obviously he was a brutal dictator. But at a certain point, America had tried to blame him for like terrorist attacks that he like clearly had nothing to do with, but then he would just like take credit for them because it like boosted his like swag or some shit.
Mm.
So literally there's footage in I believe it was Hypernormalization or one of his other films where President Bush congratulates Gaddafi on getting rid of his nuclear weapons, and Gaddafi never even had nuclear weapons. It's like what Curtis like says. And
Interesting.
I don't know, man. It's eerie. And then the Falklands thing in Shifty, it does kind of seem like, yeah, like some shit went down. I think Argentina tried to boldly take some territory and Britain responded like and kind of just kicked their ass and won a war in like 3 months or something or 2.5 months. But I'm pretty sure that kind of is the feeling in Shifty that this is like not what it seems, that like there's an element of and again similar to just what's happening in the news. It really seems like even though world leaders are kind of they're not really the ones driving events. Like it's not individual leaders that drive every single event. They can do things to kind of like distract and to take attention
Mm.
in a different direction. Because at least with Trump, I mean, when he hit Iran, all this a ton of other conversations just kind of went away. And I really get that vibe from some of Curtis's films that there still are methods where politicians can confuse and deliberately make it harder for the populace to know what's going on, and it really does seem to be the organizing principle of political power in our current age is and he talks about it a lot in Hypernormalization with Vladislav Surkov, the guy who was like
Whoa.
He's like Putin's like media guy, and in Hypernormalization he's like Putin would put on he would put on rallies for like far right groups and far left groups in Russia and like just confuse people. And so Curtis believes that's kind of like what Trump has kind of learned how to do. And if you're paying attention again, it's obviously Trump is a super controversial figure. We're not going to the purpose and he's a big character in Hypernormalization as well. And I feel like Curtis is pretty honest and compelling the way he talks about Trump where he's not taking necessarily a super critical view of Trump. He's more just saying, here's this cynical operator who is using the language of politics in our time. And the language of politics that has kind of been born, out of this post 9/11 world is it's a very kind of confused, like you can't even keep up with it. It's so crazy, like you really like there are things that happen where it seems like, at least in the Trump, especially this term, it feels like Trump is even more doing this kind of thing on purpose. But yeah, it is kind of similar to what some of these people behind the scenes are kind of like telling the politicians to do. It's a method of control to have the populace be like confused. And the internet, even though it helps people in all these ways, it's still, the society is still kind of the same, is one of Curtis's main conclusions, which was what's so interesting about the Stephen Hawking bit, where he'll just have a shot of like a black hole. He'll have like a digital like black hole, and he'll be like, "This is what Stephen Hawking believed," and it doesn't really like go anywhere. It just kind of gives you like a mood of the time, but it's kind of evidence of how much no one knows what's going on. Like there isn't, like, whether it be Britain, the Soviet Union, or America, this idea that any of our leaders are just in total control and like also have the answers to all these questions, right? It just doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be much more like they're able to use either the internet, or they're able to use like foreign conflicts and stuff to kind of give the illusion that they're capable. But in reality, England loses all of its manufacturing. Doesn't, America too, we don't make anything in America anymore. And he's shown that in a lot of films as well, kind of the industrial base and all that stuff leaving. But it's fascinating. It's a very Shifty is a very, very watchable series. But yeah, I definitely would recommend watching like all of his films in general, because this one is great, but it's also so fresh. I'm sure it's gonna get out even better, like on a rewatch.
Yeah, I've already seen like videos on YouTube being like, "You need to see this," and I mean, I saw some of the comments. Some of the comments are crazy. They're like, "I am at Mr. Curtis's driver, and he has approved of this being on YouTube." Or like, "I am his stylist. He's happy to see his content being accessible."
Yeah, that's the other thing that's really wild is you can't like get his films, like you can't like, at least in the West, I don't think that, by the way, I'm sorry, I mean in America, um because obviously in Britain you can, so basically he puts them all on the BBC iPlayer, and I think people just like upload them on YouTube. So basically all of his films are on YouTube like that. And I think it's like a copyright thing. I think he said in England he can use whatever music he wants and it doesn't cost a ton of money. But then because of that, I don't think he can like be up for rental the way that he would be if he got like the rights in America. So then I think all of his movies are just free
Yeah.
online because of that. But and he's talked about it too. He said it in interviews. He's like, I realized it would be better for my career. It would be better to have my work just on the internet right away, rather than you know have it be like inaccessible and you have to like rent it or something. But
No,
man,
it's like the fucking people when you're at a concert and everyone's like recording it.
right?
But I mean, it's just going to go out, you know. Might be like you might think it's kind of annoying or tacky that they're just like staring at the musicians, but it's kind of like it's basically just like free marketing. It only like gets you more exposure.
Oh yeah, definitely. And he has a very I wrote a paper about Adam Curtis back in college. I basically did an independent project on his films, and specifically the movie All Watched Over by Machines of Love and Grace. But I just love how kind of fluid his style is, because yeah, I'd call him a filmmaker, and I would call his work films, even though they only are on TV, and then they don't like play in theaters. But he really is kind of like a more like a novelist. He's kind of like a found footage novelist, because his influences are so cool. Basically, what I discovered
Yeah.
in my paper is he loves like John Dos Passos. That's like one of his favorite writers, and John Dos Passos is one of the great American writers. He wrote the USA trilogy. The USA trilogy is such an incredible opus, like trilogy. The structure of it is so Adam Curtis like vibe. He does this thing in USA trilogy where you'll have a chapter on a character, right? And then you have the main characters. You'll have a chapter that's on a character and it'll be like 10, 15 pages. And then between that chapter, there is like a 1-page thing and it'll say camera eye. And it's like a stream of consciousness kind of poetic thing. And you read it and you go, what is this? This is almost like the experiential, like poetic thing cut together. And then you have another chapter on one of the characters. And then after you get through another chapter on one of the characters, he has a type of chapter in the USA trilogy called newsreel. And it's a bunch of headlines of headlines around the world, like all put in a row. And the series, the USA trilogy, it takes place from like 1900 up until like the 30s. So you see in real time, you see all these headlines manifesting in World War One, manifesting in the Depression. And then he has another device that he goes to. So he has newsreel, camera eye, and then he has the chapters of the characters. And the third different device he uses for the structure of the USA trilogy is he does like bios on great American figures. So he has a bio on Eugene Debs or something, and then he has one on like Teddy Roosevelt and you know multiple presidents, and he has one that's a little bio of the tomb of the unknown soldier.
Oh.
And all these major figures. I think he might have one like on Jack Johnson, like type characters from this era, and it just creates an emotional but also completely vivid and spectacular picture of what America was like. And Curtis read those books. He read the USA trilogy and he thought, I got to do that in film. I got to have experimental elements that you can't explain. And there's a lot of that in Curtis films, like a lot of crazy cuts and like inexplicable stuff. And there's a lot of stories that kind of go nowhere. Like there's the guy in Shifty that like is like a writer who writes about the British Empire collapsing or something. And then he like dies in like a shipwreck or something. And then, like I said, he has the main characters who are the people. One of my favorite moments in Shifty, he had done this in some of his other films a little bit. Do you remember in episode 4, like a UFO shows up?
Oh, it's like a kid and it's like, Mom, look, there's a UFO. Or it's like dad and he's just, the dad's in the background like, oh, yeah, okay. And it's
That
like,
was the-
it literally, I don't know what that is. Is that just like, it looks like a coincidence? It was something else, but like, is this an important piece of like archival footage that like people have used to pinpoint the existence of you? What is it?
Dude, it's
Yeah, that's
crazy. It's like footage of a little girl pointing a camera on what looks 100% like a UFO
That's
just floating in the sky. Has no explanation for what it is. He never goes back to it. He never confirms or denies like if that's real, if like that was a legitimate UFO thing, or so I don't know. I mean, it's so interesting that he has the guts to like really mess with you as a viewer. Like you really will just like you'll see that and you don't know what that's supposed to mean. But it kind of just shows that like society is kind of unpredictable. And I don't know, the UFO thing, there's a whole lot to talk about in that regard, but it's also worth bringing up, and he said this in interviews too, where he thinks that there's going to be like religious revivals in our countries because religion is like such a strong operating principle. But another overarching kind of theme, and a lot of writers have talked about this, but specifically Nietzsche is known for this whole thing about, like, the death of God and stuff. And in the opinion of Nietzsche, we have to come up with like a new morality for our age, because before Christianity, people enjoyed being conquerors and dominating and all this kind of stuff, right? Like in the age before Christianity. And then Christianity, in Nietzsche's opinion, is the slave morality, meaning that people who are weak or who are poor are kind of elevated as like the more good of the society. And then the people that are strong and the people that are, dictators and leaders and the people that are violent and the people that run the world, they kind of are given this collective guilt. And so in the Nietzschean worldview, neither of these is really the way forward. He's not even saying we have to go back to being emperors that kill and we love that we kill.
Yeah.
He's just saying that the opposite also doesn't work. You can't just have a society that's feels guilty about its own nature. So I think there's that really factors in when we talk about this kind of existential malaise that you can feel in all these different Adam Curtis films, whether it be films set in Russia, Britain, America. It's a general kind of feeling because all these societies don't really have a strong religious feeling. And especially in some of the other films he made about, like The Power of Nightmares was really controversial because he released that movie in 2004, that series, and it's about how Al Qaeda is like not that Al Qaeda has been like exaggerated how strong they are.
Whoa.
And then Bitter Lake, I just rewatched that one, probably the best film on Afghanistan, the Middle East ever made. And yeah, I mean that's the reality. The West is largely very devoid of Christianity, even though we are kind of Christian societies, like in some sort of way. And then we have all these, like, endless Middle Eastern conflicts, and the people that we're at war with are just 10 times more organized in their belief system, And I think Curtis, he doesn't really get into that as much in Shifty. He kind of shows like Indian immigrants and stuff and black people in Britain. He doesn't really talk about Islam in Shifty, but he does, talk about it in the other films. And it is, I feel like it is very much one of the big questions of our age is how are like Western societies going to have healthy relationships with, the Middle East? Because I obviously think that we meddle way too much, and I'm against all these endless wars. I mean, if I can wave a magic wand, I would pull every American troop out of the Middle East tomorrow, But it's kind of interesting though, because a lot of times the Muslim characters that he'll have in his films, they're more sure of what they want than a lot of Western figures, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's kind of how Curtis's like view works. I think he believes there are great figures, but I don't think he believes that great figures single-handedly shape history. They're more like they can be at the right place at the right time to do something that'll make something happen. But there's an overall sense of stagnation
Sure.
that really is just pervading. But yeah, and wasn't there a part 2 in there about Princess Diana being anorexic instead of bulimic?
No, it was, or she said, it was like bulimia is better because it doesn't. Yeah, no, it said it was like defending being bulimic versus anorexia, and she's like, there's a lot of interesting Princess Diana stuff in the film too, because that one shot where everyone's inside and she's just outside of the building, just kind of like standing there.
Oh yeah.
Or she like plays piano really, really nicely, and then she looks like she just wants to get the fuck out of there, and that one guy's like trying to grab her and kiss her on the cheek. It's like the fucking princess. It's like, I don't know if that guy's allowed to do that, or in a more serious note, yeah, I guess like the rape stuff in the film is pretty devastating too. When that lady is doing like she's talking and they're just like, well, if you're making this up, it's good. It's going to be a real pain for you.
Yeah, that was brutal to see.
It's just like, oh my gosh.
There's this awful sequence where a woman is telling the police that she was like sexually assaulted, and the police are like just openly not believing her. And it was like, Jesus Christ. And I don't know, I think that is definitely another conclusion that he makes. Like when you see stuff like that, or when you see kind of, when you see racism happening in like archival footage, or you see the police just like not wanting
Or
to help.
the security camera of that guy's convenience store.
Yeah, yeah. When you see that stuff, you do think, okay, we have improved in certain areas. Like there has been.
Or that one kid that's like, yeah, I'll just hit him or spit on him if I see him.
Yeah, that was
he
crazy.
has like no shame about it at all.
And doesn't he say that on camera? He's just like getting interviewed.
Yeah.
Insane. No, because back then it's like if you like, even if you were that openly racist, you were like, no one's gonna see this. Oh my
40
god!
40 years later.
No, because it really it does seem like he will show how, in like his own way, he'll show that there are aspects of society that have improved. Like it's more obvious when something is very wrong, and in today's world we can't tolerate it. I mean, I'm sure all this stuff kind of still exists. Like it really just feels like the same world except with more primitive technology. Like that's really my big takeaway from Shifty, is that the world of Britain in the late in the 80s and 90s is eerily similar to today, even though it really, all that's changed is we have better technology, and then everything else is the same. But no, I mean, in that case, when you do see stuff like that, like racism happening or sexism, that is one of the places where I think Curtis is saying, okay, this is something that has improved, like it's not as outward. Like some of this stuff is, so there is like a sense of progress with history passing on, but it's not like people are just, completely cured of their anxieties. It's anxiety is kind of displaced by technology, and we kind of have all the same forms of all the same types of things to keep our mind off of what's going on. But
we'll always have dancing.
Yeah, there's always dancing.
Well, there's no better form of expression than like trying to be. You can't like be sad and dance.
Yeah,
I mean that's what makes some of the footage so interesting, is the distracting aspects of it, because it's like, why is a fucking shot of a nightclub where everyone's playing air guitar interesting? And it's because all this other horrible shit's going on. I mean, people, they were talking about the individual in the film and Thatcher's belief in that, but I mean, everyone's got something going on. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like when I remember one time I was at the hospital and I thought something was like really serious, and then I like looked in the corner and like all the coworkers are like on their phone and like laughing about something. I'm like, how the fuck, like what's going on over there? You just move around the spaces of England, kind of like I don't know, kind of like a chessboard. That's like, I love the title cards that just shows where this was.
Right.
It's in like these apartment buildings, and then it's in the Falklands, and then it's I really like that. I think in episode 1 when it was in that church, and they were in the church and listening to the last, like, I think choir performance in it.
Right.
That was crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in this movie of just because it really does feel like in this kind of strange way, and this applies to today, but it definitely applies to this footage from the 80s and 90s in Britain, where it just feels like it's a transitional period, but then it's just an age where there isn't like, and by transitional, I mean, like you're saying, like a church gets like, I think that church was going to get demolished or something is like
Yeah.
part of it. Yeah. And then there's a part where it's like, here's this school, like an all girls school, and it's going to get closed. And there's just a lot of that kind of thing. There's a lot of like things getting shut down, like coal miners all getting laid off because of decisions that were made, and
They're like, I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna have no money,
yeah, you just have a
and he's
whole
covered in
industry.
coal.
Yeah, you just have entire kind of like working class industries and so many old institutions just kind of quietly going away, but it's not like a whole thing. Like, again, like going back to Trauma Zone, or whenever you talk about the Soviet Union, a lot of it is just very larger than life because, they had very pronounced periods of, okay, now religion is bad. And then they destroyed all their churches and persecuted Christians when it was the Soviet Union, and now that Putin's the president and the Soviet Union is done, Putin uses Christianity as like a tool. So now Russia is very Christian again. But it is fascinating. The whole part with Stephen Hawking and his wife. It's so interesting that Stephen Hawking is clearly like a genius, but then his ideology essentially leads him in this direction where
The end
he's
of
just
his
like,
marriage.
yeah, where he's just like, God isn't real, and then his wife is like shut up. And then something started to happen. Stephen Hawking needed to get sloppy toppy on Epstein Island.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I went, oh wow. I'll tell you. You brought up your favorite part. I'm going to tell you my favorite part of the film. It's when that kid is, I'm assuming, with his mother and his grandfather, and has like this pedal that's making like the fucking
Oh yeah, the guy, the
chunkiest,
kid on the guitar.
and he's shredding, and he's like, "What will your band?" He's like, "My band's going to be called 4D, Fourth Dimension," and then he just goes into like explaining, and I don't know. It made me wonder is because I don't know if I was if I was younger, I probably would have hated that kid. But I'm like, this guy sucks. But what I was thinking of, it's kind of like there's so much more access to I don't know, it's weird because people say music was better back in the 80s or 90s, and it's not. I wouldn't say that. I think just because there's so many more things going on today, I think the mainstream stuff was. Because I remember you and Ben talking about that. You said that kind of like every like 40s and 50s movie is just better. He's like, you can pull up like any random movie, and it's probably better than something today.
Yeah, but yeah, the range is
Like, I guess, yeah,
extreme
classic Hollywood.
today.
And I was thinking kind of like that kid doesn't exist in that moment without, I guess, that structure that I think I've just described.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that.
Oh, it's
part.
kind of like athletes are getting better, society should be getting better, but it's, that's definitely up to debate.
Oh yeah, no, because again, I don't think he has like a simplified, and obviously, a very interesting question with Curtis is like, what would his political feelings actually be? You know what I mean? He also said in an interview, he said his father's generation, when he hung out with his friends, his father and his friends would talk about politics.
Mm.
They would talk about who's running for office. They're talking about what's happening in society. And he said when he was growing up, everybody talked about the bands that they loved. So then that's one of the big reasons he like music is so front and center in his films, is that he just thinks that emotionally people are just, and young people are way more connected to art in this way. And he definitely is kind of cynical towards art, like throughout his films, because he'll feature artists and like, oh my God, there's a part in Bitter Lake where a woman is teaching a class of Afghan women, like Muslim women, about conceptual art. And she pulls up a photo of the Duchamp toilet. And she's like, do any of you know what this is? And everyone's like looking at it, and she's like, this is a toilet. Duchamp put this in an art gallery. And it's like just the ultimate symbol of
Yeah.
Western failure in Afghanistan is that there were classes teaching women with hijabs about Duchamp's toilet. Like, it's just the ultimate dead end of like, yeah, we're gonna bring democracy to a people that don't want it. And then Curtis points it out in this way where he just has to feature the footage and you instantly get what he's kind of angling at, where it's like, you know, are we going to pat ourselves on the back for our society? And are we going to look down at people in the Muslim world just because, of a whole slew of reasons? But when you really go to the furthest extent of it, you can look at Western society and be like, this is a little goofy. Like, this doesn't really work, like this. I think that's kind of like one of his theses. Oh my God, I'm hearing a cop car. Okay, they went a different direction. Um, but no, I feel like it's a really interesting question. Like, what are his politics? Like, would he be like right wing or left wing? I think he's pretty brilliantly detached. Like, you couldn't tell. Like, I've seen almost all of his
Yeah.
films. I have no idea who he's voted for over the years. I mean, he's very critical of everybody. He's kind of just equally critical of everyone. He's critical of right-wing politicians who think that they're changing society, and he's very skeptical of how much power they have, and then he's also very
There's
cynical about artists that
there's a
would
line
rather.
in the series, who would exclude you if you threaten their power?
Oh,
I remember that fucking punched me in the face.
oh my God, yeah, that's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I definitely would recommend this series. I mean, I think it's incredible. I would love to rewatch it. I'm sure I'm missing out on bits that I'm like forgetting, but it's very.
Ventriloquism.
Oh yeah, there was a ventriloquist
There's
guy.
like, there was also a girl, I think, in one of the first few episodes where it freaking like cuts from her, and well, when I say the dummy is calling herself fat,
Oh yeah.
and it's like body shaming herself, and then it cuts to Stephen Hawking, who is a man who, through no control of his own, is like losing the ability to move anything in his entire body.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a brilliant, one of the many brilliant cuts.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Just that juxtaposition was pretty interesting.
No, it's great. I think he's definitely one of the smartest political filmmakers of all time. And talking about history, he's just so sharp. It's just like
Mm.
it's so poignant, like when you make a series and every cut is trying to be like, hey, think about today, think about today. Like you just feel so much. You just go, wow, our society is just the same. Like nothing has changed.
I was gonna ask you. So he normally does narration.
Yeah.
Is it in a similar prose to the title cards that pop up on here, like describing like a situation?
Oh yeah. It's like
Okay.
the same. His tone of voice is very similar because he kind of narrativizes things. He'll be like, but they tried to do this, but it was a failure. And then he'll be like, and then somebody came up with an idea.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's awesome. Stephen Hawking was a brilliant astrophysicist.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, Stephen Hawking was a brilliant astrophysicist, but he believed that the world had no meaning. No, it's awesome. Yeah, we're gonna do like a full Adam Curtis like breakdown of his entire
Nice.
career off of this, just because this series is pretty amazing and there's plenty of stuff to talk about. But he's made so many great films, and there's just so much more to like, dig your teeth into. Like, and yeah, there's stuff with like animals that's pretty interesting in this series. I love there's like the shot of them trying to, I think because the zoo shuts down or something, and they're moving the elephant, and the elephant is just like uncontrollably shaking and trying to avoid getting
Yeah.
moved. That was wild.
Yeah. Top comment on episode 4: the elephant man ... just brought me to tears. And then I saw another one that said, wouldn't be a Curtis joint without archival footage of people hysterically dancing in a vain attempt to change their material reality by changing their inner worlds. I went, oh, okay. I was like, I think I have an idea.
It's so great. He's, because again, we're kind of saying the same like vibe about like the stagnation and stuff, but his whole goal with his films is basically he wants to make these films, show what's happened, show how society has gone, show like all these different things that have happened, and then contrast it with today and say, okay, but we're kind of at the end of something. Like we're in a transitional moment that we're going to look back and go, oh, I didn't even know what the moment was until you're outside of it. Like you don't really like know what an era is until you have a little bit of like distance. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't really know if I have much more to say. I'm kind of blanking on anything else to bring up.
It's just so dense.
Yeah, it's very dense for sure. I'm going to definitely watch it again. I'm glad we got like this reaction episode up, but yeah, it's inspiring. I think history, I feel like this is also another thing that Curtis kind of proves with his work. History is just more interesting than fiction. I mean, there have been more batshit insane things that happen in real life than, like, I had this conclusion. I read, Jorge Luis Borges, the great short story writer. You've heard of him?
I don't believe I have.
He did like the Tower of, or like he'll like a short story about like a never ending library. And then he did like one about whatever, but he wrote a book called it's like the Book of Imaginary Beings or something.
Okay.
And it's basically just, the Book of Imaginary Beings. It's essentially kind of like a little encyclopedia of every fictional creature. And then he describes where it came from. Like being like, here's where like a dragon came from. Here's like a centaur. And when you read that book, it occurs to you that there are more real animals than there are imagined animals. Like, and I think that's just true for fiction and nonfiction, which is why I've always been so attracted to documentary. And I've always loved filmmakers like, Albert Serra, Pedro Costa, or, Adam Curtis, where you can kind of blend fact and fiction.
Yeah.
And it makes something even more interesting because fiction is kind of just, I'm not going to say it's boring. And I'm not as extreme as like a Bellatar who says every story has been told, but there's something about it. When you get archival footage of things that are happening, you realize that it's just more honest than you writing a sentence about a fictional character in the era that you're talking about, I mean, I think Curtis probably in his brain had thought of making like fiction films. I think he's always kind of been very much a documentarian, but the tone of his films is so much like novels, and there's so much like their fiction because they're so entertaining and stuff. But he's really just proving if all you could do to be an artist, you had to use material that already exists, you could still make all kinds of stuff, you know? And yeah, truth is stranger than fiction. It really is. And, you know, like he kind of did with like the alien bit, or just Stephen Hawking talking about, you know, theoretical physics and stuff. The vast majority of the universe and the vast majority of kind of human knowledge is just incredibly it's still totally unknown. Like, people only know so much. Like, our the vast majority of how everything works, like how the universe works, how, like, you know, the solar system, the planets, stars, like all this kind of stuff, we're still kind of unable to explain everything in this scientific way, right? Which, like I was bringing up with Nietzsche earlier, it really kind of is the dead end of our age, that we've decided to convert our Western society out of a religious template, and we've decided to kind of be these atheistic societies. But then, even though, you know, obviously no one wants to live in a theocracy, like, you know, and I'm not pro, like, you know, I wouldn't want to live under a theocracy. Those societies, like in the Middle East, they seem to have more of a direction in life that means something. Like, they have more meaning in their lives than people who are kind of just living in this atheist world where it's very hard to have a system of morals, right? Because it's just like, it's everything, like there's too many possibilities. It's kind of a stagnation of options in the West. And also part of the stagnation of options, like we're kind of talking about with Stephen Hawking or that hilarious UFO bit in Shifty, is because we've given up the religious morality to govern our societies. Now it opens the door for, okay, now we gotta like explain everything. And if you see some insane lights in the sky and this is 200 years ago, you think it's an angel or you think it's like a demon, you know? But then in our world, it's either, I mean, could it be like an alien? Who even really knows? Or, as Curtis kind of brings up in hypernormalization, is the government intentionally fucking with people with technologies that they have that they don't want to disclose that they have, and then they use these technologies to make people believe that there are aliens. And he brings that up in hypernormalization. There's a person that is interviewed and he's like, yeah, we definitely tried to make people believe that there were flying saucers in the sky. And yeah, it could just be, and that's the thing that's a little bit frustrating, is that when you're stuck in this unknown thing, when weird shit happens that's unexplained, you know, like the dog having its genitals switch, you really wonder to yourself, is this just because the world is so chaotic that no one has any control and no one has any answers? Or is someone controlling some of it? Like, is some of this deliberate? Like, and again, you know, I think he definitely is much more in the camp of politicians' power is greatly exaggerated, especially in the West. Like, they've very much given it up to the markets and stuff. I do think there is a little bit of this amusing feeling where he is admitting that there are some shenanigans going on. Like, it's very likely that these governments or these people behind the scenes, aware of the conversations we're having right now about, like, you know, how do we create a society where we have new morals and all this kind of thing. They know that based on how people think nowadays, you can really twist them in circles and kind of keep them from changing things that are making people money. I mean, that's at the end of the day kind of what the managerial class gets out of this. They don't necessarily affect the world getting better. They more just kind of line their pockets and then pretend like they have power. But yeah, I mean, I don't know I have anything else to say. I feel like this series is very dense, but it's also kind of hard to remember every single sequence because there's there's so much and there's so many moments that are so understated. I think that's what I really appreciate about this film and Trauma Zone, that he is kind of going in like a Wong Bing like direction at times where he's very purely observational at times when you don't because there's a lot of shots that are very poignant where you're like, oh, I get what he's saying here. He's trying to imply that this is the era we're in is like this. But there is just a lot of just beautiful kind of documentarian, observational stuff that I don't even think he is. I don't think every shot he has a thesis behind every shot. I think sometimes he just rhythmically likes kind of observing people and stuff. And I think Trauma Zone and Shifty are definitely a much more patiently observational version of Curtis and a lot less. They're a lot these two films are less like tied together than some of his other films because a lot of his films they'll have strong like narratives and stuff and they'll be all over the place and they'll string a lot of things together, but these feel a lot more open-ended. Like it does feel like there's more to interpret like within some of this stuff. Like it's you're not necessarily like I said, you're kind of with these people. You're kind of just experiencing another era as well, which is what I appreciate. But yeah, we'll be back. I think we're gonna do like a full Adam Curtis episode, and we're just gonna do more stuff in the coming weeks. And yeah, well, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back again.
Woo!
All right, peace.